They were supposed to be my family, the ones I could trust above all. But when they turned their backs on me, cutting me off without a second thought, I realized the worst betrayal wasn't just losing their support. It was discovering how deeply I had to fight, not just for survival, but to reclaim my own identity from the ruins they left behind. Abigail Stone had always thought birthdays were supposed to be special. But on her 22nd, the day that should have been filled with celebration and laughter, everything in her life unraveled. She arrived at her family's estate in Connecticut just after noon, a bouquet of fresh sunflowers in hand, her mother's favorite. The air was crisp, sunlight filtered through the trees lining the long driveway, and everything looked picture-perfect. But something in the air felt off. As she stepped through the door, her father, Richard Stone, met her in the eye. Grand foyer, his expression as cold as the marble floor beneath her feet. "You're late," he said, voice clipped. "I wasn't aware we had a set time," Abigail replied, trying to keep her tone light. She extended the bouquet. "These are for Mom. He didn't take them. You can leave them in the kitchen, then meet us in the drawing room." Confused, Abigail walked slowly through the familiar halls of the home she'd grown up in, a sense of unease building in her chest. Her mother, Margaret, was seated stiffly on the velvet sofa, lips pursed, hands clasped tightly. Her younger brother Nathan lounged nearby, tapping away at his phone, barely glancing up. "Sit down," Richard ordered. "What is this?" Abigail asked. "An intervention," Margaret said. "Excuse me?" Richard stepped forward, voice like ice. "You've made a series of decisions that reflect poorly on this family. Dropping out of Yale, pursuing art, living with that Jessica." Abigail blinked, stunned. "You mean my best friend and roommate?" "You were supposed to be a lawyer," Richard continued. "We invested in you." "I never wanted that life," Abigail said quietly. "Then you'll no longer be funded by this family," Margaret said. "We've closed your accounts, canceled your credit cards. As of today, you are on your own." Abigail felt the room spin. "You're cutting me off? On my birthday?" "Consider it your first day as an adult," Richard said. Nathan finally looked up, smirking. "Happy birthday, sis." Abigail stood, heart pounding. "Fine," she said. "I don't need your money, but I expected love, support." "Love doesn't come without expectations," Margaret said. Abigail didn't respond. She walked out, without another word, the door slamming behind her. She spent the night at Jessica's tiny studio apartment, curled up on a futon with a bottle of cheap wine and 1,000 unspoken words. Jessica listened, furious on her behalf, but careful, not to fan the flames too high. "We'll figure it out," she said. "You're not alone." That night, Abigail couldn't sleep. Rage pulsed through her veins. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was furious. And beneath the fury, a cold resolve began to take shape. Her parents wanted to teach her a lesson. She'd show them how well she could learn. The next day, she emptied the last of her bank account, what little remained untouched, into a new credit union account. She sold some old electronics, then visited the university's emergency aid office. "I was cut off by my parents," she told the director, a sympathetic woman named Kimberly. "I need help staying enrolled." Kimberly nodded. "You're not the first. We have options for students in your position." A few hours later, Abigail left with information on housing programs, emergency grants, and independent student status paperwork. Jessica helped her move into temporary housing, a converted dormitory used for displaced students. It was small, drafty, and far from luxurious, but it was hers. She began picking up freelance design work, using skills she'd quietly developed while double majoring in digital art and communications. At first, it was logos and flyers for local cafes, then social media packages, eventually full website designs. Her professors noticed the change in her. "You're more focused than ever," Dr. Willis, her favorite design professor, said during a portfolio review. "Anger is a powerful motivator," Abigail replied. But it wasn't just anger. It was the need to prove herself. One night, while finishing a client project, she confided in Jessica. "I want to get back at them," she admitted. "Your parents?" Abigail nodded. Not violently, not anything illegal, but something that makes them understand what they did. Jessica hesitated. Just promise you won't let revenge be your only fuel. It burns fast. Abigail smiled sadly. Just enough to get me through. Over the next few weeks, she began researching her father's businesses, her mother's philanthropic projects, Nathan's college activities, every financial move, public statement, and business deal they were involved in. With Tyler, a classmate and part-time cybersecurity geek, she created anonymous email addresses, encrypted files, and a system of digital breadcrumbs. You're scaring me a little, Tyler joked, just helping some truths find their way to the right places, Abigail replied. Using knowledge from her communications classes, she drafted professional-looking documents exposing minor financial irregularities in her father's company. Not criminal, but questionable enough to spark scrutiny. She timed the anonymous reports with a pending business acquisition Richard had been courting for months. The deal collapsed. Margaret's social media accounts, curated to perfection, were subtly targeted next. Old comments resurfaced. Past hypocrisies, quietly highlighted. Several charity board invitations were revoked. Nathan was caught in a campus plagiarism scandal, thanks to a tip Abigail provided anonymously, backed by screenshots of copied essays from a shared drive. Each move was small, but strategic, carefully timed, leaving no trace back to her. Jessica knew the broad strokes but not the details. This isn't just about revenge anymore, Jessica said one night. It's war. Abigail stared out the window. No, it's survival. But even as her schemes unfolded, so did her life. She secured an internship with a small but respected design firm. Started attending therapy sessions through a university program. Slowly rebuilt her confidence. During one session, Dr. Nelson, her therapist, asked, "What would justice look like for you?" Abigail thought for a long moment. For them to understand what they did. For them to feel even a fraction of what I felt. And would that bring you peace? Abigail didn't answer. One night, an email came from her father's assistant. A request for a meeting. Abigail stared at it for hours before deleting it. She wasn't ready. On her 23rd birthday, Jessica organized a small surprise party with a few close friends. There was laughter, music, and a simple chocolate cake. As she blew out the candles, Abigail made a silent wish. For freedom. Not just from her family's control, but from the anger still chained around her heart. The first month after I executed the revenge plan passed in a surreal blur. I'd expected some sort of satisfaction, closure even, but the emptiness I felt was as vast as the silence from my parents. No midnight phone calls, no furious emails, just silence. The kind that echoes. The kind that makes you question if you ever mattered at all. Jessica remained my rock. If she suspected the full extent of what I'd done, she didn't press. We kept our conversations light, class assignments, rent, our favorite Netflix shows, but a heaviness lingered beneath it all. At night, I sometimes caught her watching me from across our small kitchen table, concern etched in the line of her brow. One evening, about 4 weeks after my birthday, Jessica slid a manila envelope toward me. Something came for you at the MOI. Front desk. From a law firm in Connecticut. I signed for it. I stared at the envelope, heart hammering. My last tie to that state was my parents. I tore it open with trembling hands. Inside was a letter. A formal notice of investigation from a private law firm representing my parents. The language was couched in vague legalese, but the implication was clear. They suspected a cyber attack had caused the lockout of several financial accounts, and they were pursuing avenues to identify the culprit. My stomach dropped. I read it twice before speaking. They're getting lawyers involved, I said finally. They think someone hacked them. Jessica looked startled, but not surprised. They have no proof it was you, right? You used everything Tyler showed you. VPNs, anonymous emails, private browsing, burner numbers. I nodded slowly. I was careful. But the thought that they're spending thousands on lawyers trying to solve a mystery I created. Jessica reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. They're trying to control the narrative. They always have. Don't let it pull you back in. But I already felt it, like invisible vines wrapping around my ankles, tugging me back into their world. A week later, I got an email from Professor Willis. He was still in contact with a few design firms and had forwarded my portfolio to a prestigious firm in Boston. They wanted to schedule an interview. "You've got real talent. Abigail," he wrote. "Your latest work has emotional intensity that sets it apart." The firm noticed. I stared at the screen for a long time. A part of me wanted to feel proud, but the weight of the revenge, the secret I still carried, dulled every victory. I had built a house of cards, and now I was trying to balance a life on top of it. I met with Dr. Nelson, the therapist from the University Wellness Center, for a follow-up session. I hadn't seen her since the week of my eviction. "You look different," she said as I sat across from her. "Older, more tired. I feel it." We talked for almost an hour. She asked if I was still in contact with my parents. "No," I said. "But I did something big, something that felt right at the time, but now—" She didn't press for details. Instead, she said, "When someone's been profoundly betrayed, there's often a temptation to reverse the roles, to make them feel what you felt. But healing rarely comes from symmetry." I nodded. Her words hit closer than I was willing to admit. That night, I opened a private journal file on my laptop and began to write. Not just about what I'd done, but why. How it felt to be discarded like an outdated dress. How their silence had stung more than any shouting match. How the revenge, elaborate as it was, had become a tether to them rather than a release. Over the next few weeks, I started focusing on rebuilding. I dove headfirst into my design projects, pouring raw emotion into my pieces. Dr. Carter noticed. "Whatever pain you've been carrying," he said one day, flipping through my sketchbook, "you're finally using it. This is the most honest work I've seen from you." I was invited to present at the campus showcase. For the first time, my name appeared on the promotional posters, and I watched students stop to look at them in the art building lobby. The night of the showcase, Jessica helped me pick out a dress from a thrift store, and I wore it with the kind of pride that only comes from having earned everything yourself. People paused at my exhibit. They lingered. They asked questions. One woman, a gallery owner from a small local studio, scribbled her email on a napkin and asked me to reach out. "I see something important in your work," she said. For the first time since my eviction, I felt something stirring in me that wasn't anger. It was fragile, like a sprout breaking through dry soil. Hope. But just as quickly, a message popped up on my burner email account later that night. From richardeverettlegalaol.com. Subject, formal request for return of property. The email was brief, accusing, and cold. Richard demanded the return of family heirlooms he claimed I had taken, a silver pocket watch, a set of porcelain figurines, and a family Bible from the 1800s. I hadn't taken any of those things. I responded in the same curt tone. "I removed only my personal belongings when I left. I have no access to or possession of any items you listed." No further reply came, but the message had already cracked open the wound again. Jessica found me sitting on the apartment balcony the next morning, staring at the sky. "You're doing the hard work of moving forward," she said, sitting beside me. "And they're flailing in the rear view. That tells you everything." Her words were comfort, but not a cure. I continued my therapy sessions. I journaled. I made lists, short-term goals, financial targets, apartment repairs, and grocery budgets. Control became my coping mechanism. Then a message came through from my cousin Stephanie. "Can we talk?" We hadn't spoken since the family rupture. Stephanie had always been more of an observer than an ally, present at gatherings, never confrontational. But her message was followed by a call. "Aunt Margaret's version of events isn't sitting. Right with me," she said. "I wanted to hear your side." We talked for over an hour. I told her the truth. Not the revenge, but the rejection, the eviction, the coldness. Stephanie didn't say much, but I heard her breathing change. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know." Her call was followed by others. Quiet, private, messages from extended family members who'd begun to question the Everett family narrative. Each one felt like a tiny vindication. A crack in the wall they'd built, but I didn't want to live for cracks. I wanted to build something of my own. By the end of the semester, I had secured additional funding, signed a lease with 2 fellow students for the next year, and accepted a summer internship offer from the design firm Professor Willis had connected me with. On the last day of finals, Jessica surprised me with a chocolate cake and a single candle. "No more birthday disasters," she declared. We ate cake on the Yitzhak floor of our living room, music playing from an old Bluetooth speaker, and I laughed until I cried. I was building something, slowly, quietly, away from them. But the story wasn't over yet. Part 3 continues the final transformation, reconciliation on Abigail's terms, and the full arc of her journey from rejection to self-made freedom. The profound betrayal I felt still lingered beneath the surface, raw and aching. When I finally confided in Dr. Carter about the storm inside me, he listened carefully. "Your anger is completely valid," he said softly. "But why do you feel worse the more you get back at them?" I paused. "Because revenge keeps the relationship alive," I admitted. "Just in a different form." He nodded knowingly. "Exactly. You're still allowing them to occupy your emotional energy, your time, and your thoughts. True freedom comes from breaking that connection, not just reversing it." His words resonated deeply, but I wasn't ready to let go completely. Not yet. Over the next few months, I kept a watchful eye on my parents' financial situation while trying to rebuild my life, living with one foot in each world. The weight of that double existence was exhausting. During a portfolio review, Dr. Carter offered another perspective. After studying my recent designs, his concerned expression was impossible to miss. "Abigail, your technical skills remain excellent," he said carefully. "But these recent pieces lack your usual emotional depth. They feel mechanical." I hadn't realized how much my inner turmoil was manifesting in my work. "I've had a lot going on," I explained vaguely. "Art requires presence," he said gently. "When we're consumed by past hurts or future anxieties, our creative voice gets muffled. Whatever is pulling you backward needs to be released before you can move forward authentically." That evening, while compulsively refreshing my monitoring email for updates on my parents' financial confusion, a classmate's offhand remark caught me off guard. "You check that email more often than social media," Rachel observed while we worked on a group project. "Must be something pretty important." I realized with startling clarity how much mental real estate my revenge scheme still occupied. My parents' lives were temporarily disrupted, but mine remained permanently, altered by both their rejection and my response to it. They would eventually sort out their financial issues, but I risked defining my new independence entirely in terms of my relationship with them, even if that relationship was now based on retaliation. That night, I sat alone in my tiny apartment, weighing my options. I could continue monitoring and maintaining the financial obstacles I'd created, extending their difficulties and my emotional entanglement. Or I could choose to focus entirely on rebuilding my life, investing that same energy into my future rather than their punishment. The decision crystallized when I received an email from the prestigious design firm where Professor Willis had recommended me for a summer internship. They requested an interview and portfolio review for next week. This opportunity could launch my career, but only if I arrived focused and prepared, not distracted by vendetta. I made my choice. Using the anonymous email account I'd created, I detailed instructions for unfreezing accounts and resetting security settings, information that would allow my parents to restore financial access without revealing my involvement. I scheduled the email to send automatically in 2 days, providing a resolution that appeared to come from the financial institutions themselves. When I told Jessica, she hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "This takes more strength than continuing the revenge ever would. Letting go wasn't easy." Part of me still wanted them to suffer longer, to fully understand the devastation they'd caused, but no amount of financial inconvenience could make them truly comprehend the emotional damage of their rejection. Some lessons they would never learn, and accepting that was part of my healing. With my decision made, I redirected my energy entirely toward building my new life. I applied for additional scholarships specifically for independent students, securing enough funding to cover my final semester's tuition. My portfolio for the internship interview received my complete attention, resulting in designs Dr. Carter described as your most authentic work yet. The summer internship offer came through, providing both professional experience and a modest stipend that would allow me to maintain my independence during the summer months. I found affordable off-campus housing with 2 other design students for the following semester, ensuring stability beyond my emergency housing period. 3 weeks. Later, Jessica organized a surprise birthday gathering with my new friends from housing and work. No elaborate gifts or fancy restaurants, just genuine connections and chocolate cake in our small common room. For the first time in years, I blew out candles surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was. That evening, an unexpected email arrived from a gallery owner who had attended our department's student showcase. He expressed interest in including 2 of my pieces in an upcoming exhibition featuring emerging artists. This opportunity hadn't come through family connections or financial privilege, but purely through recognition of my talent. As spring turned to summer, I felt increasingly liberated from the anger that had initially fueled me. I still had difficult days and moments of grief for the family relationship I'd lost, but I no longer defined myself primarily as their rejected daughter or clever avenger. I was becoming Abigail, the designer, the friend, the survivor. Identities built on my foundations, rather than in reaction to their treatment. 1 year after being kicked out, on my birthday, my life had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. I graduated with honors. Despite the financial obstacles, walking across the stage while Jessica and my new friends cheered loudly from the audience. No family members attended, but their absence no longer defined the experience. My summer internship had converted into a junior designer position at a small but respected firm, providing enough income for a modest but stable life. I shared an apartment with Jessica and Rachel, our combined resources creating a warm home filled with creativity and mutual support. Financial literacy had become a priority, almost an obsession. I tracked every dollar, built an emergency fund, and established credit in my name, determined never to be financially vulnerable again. My relationship with money became intentional rather than reactive, focused on security rather than status. Occasional updates about my parents still reached me through mutual connections. They had eventually recovered from the financial disruptions, blaming system glitches and identity theft protection services rather than ever suspecting my involvement. Their attempts to contact me increased after their financial situation stabilized, messages oscillating between demands for reconciliation on their terms and guilt-inducing references to family obligation. I maintained very limited contact, responding to direct communications with brief, neutral messages that established clear boundaries. When Richard demanded the return of family heirlooms that he claimed were in my possession, I replied simply that I had taken only my personal belongings when leaving. When Margaret suggested a fresh start without acknowledging any wrongdoing, I declined politely but firmly. My therapy sessions continued, now focusing less on immediate crisis management and more on long-term healing. Dr. Nelson helped me recognize unhealthy family patterns to avoid repeating, particularly around money and control. Breaking generational patterns requires conscious effort, she explained during one session. Awareness is the first step, but new behaviors cement the change. This awareness influenced all my relationships. I became attentive to power dynamics, careful not to replicate my father's controlling tendencies or my mother's emotional manipulation. I practiced direct communication, reasonable boundaries, and authentic expression of needs, skills that had been actively discouraged in my family of origin. My friendship circle expanded beyond Jessica to include people who supported my growth rather than limiting it. Kimberly, from emergency housing, became a close friend after we discovered shared interest in photography and hiking. Tyler, whose tech guidance had enabled my revenge, became a trusted confidant who understood family rejection firsthand. Most surprising was my developing role as a mentor to other students navigating family estrangement. When the housing program director asked if I would speak to a newly arrived student whose parents had cut her off financially, I agreed without hesitation. Sharing my experience and practical survival strategies gave purpose to my painful journey. Extended family relationships required careful recalibration. My cousin Stephanie reached out privately after hearing conflicting versions of my departure. Aunt Margaret's story seemed off, she admitted. I wanted to hear your side. Our conversation led to a tentative reconnection, followed by similar outreach from other relatives questioning the official narrative. These relationships developed on my terms, with clear boundaries and mutual respect, rather than the obligation and performance my parents had demanded. As the anniversary of my birthday approached, Jessica suggested a celebration to reclaim the date. Not a pity party, she insisted. A freedom party, marking 1 year of independence. The gathering became a milestone, an opportunity to reflect on how far I'd come. Surrounded by friends who had become chosen family, I realized the painful birthday that had felt like an ending was a beginning. I thought losing my parents' support would destroy me, I told the small group assembled in our apartment. Instead, it forced me to discover strengths I never knew I had. The most profound lesson from that turbulent year was understanding that my parents' rejection reflected their limitations, not my worth. Their inability to love unconditionally, to support my dreams, to see me as a person rather than an extension of themselves was their failure, not mine. The revenge that had initially seemed so satisfying had provided only temporary relief. Real healing came not from making them suffer, but from building a life they had no power to damage. Every achievement was earned through my effort. Every genuine connection is formed without manipulation. Every moment of joy experienced on my terms became a brick in the foundation of my new life. I had also learned the complicated truth that anger could be both fuel and poison. Initially, it had propelled me forward when despair might have overwhelmed me. But hanging on to it would have eventually corrupted my spirit, turning me into a mirror image of what I despised. On my 23rd birthday, celebrated with chosen family in our cozy apartment, I made a wish as I blew out the candles, not for my parents to suffer, but for my own heart to keep healing, to remain open to joy despite past wounds. That evening, I wrote in my journal, 1 year ago, I thought my life was ending. Today, I understand it was just beginning, on new terms. The people who should have loved me most couldn't or wouldn't, but that didn't stop me from finding love, building community, and creating a life aligned with my values rather than their expectations. The greatest revenge isn't making others suffer. It's refusing to let their cruelty define you. Have you ever experienced family rejection or financial control similar to Abigail's? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking and subscribing to support more content about overcoming family trauma and building independence. And remember, sometimes the family we choose becomes more important than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my journey. I wish you strength in whatever challenges you're facing today.